Hey, this is Ramon, channel Alpha 4, and this is the third time I've tried to record this video. And it's not even going to be that important. Truth is, I was going to do a video about Julius Caesar for you guys, but the research and my personal life kind of took up more time than I expected. I'm training a client for a competition in July, and we're having to ramp that up. My work, my actual job that pays me, that has slowed down a lot, so I've been communicating with my employer about what my next steps should be. And also I've just been doing research on the video for you guys. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that the next video is going to have a shitload of graphics. Truth is, I've been using the creator software on YouTube, and lately it just hasn't been working as well for me as it was in the beginning. I don't know if there's like some kind of unlocking where you get more data storage, or if I just need to buy some software myself, but I don't really have the money for that right now, so I don't even know. Basically, I've been trying to make the videos run together more smoothly. If you looked at my bookshelf haul, that's kind of me trying to play with the editing, but shorter clips just for some reason won't save to YouTube, so I don't even know what to do. But that doesn't mean I don't have a video for you guys. See, I've been doing research on Caesar, and right now I've been using the Loeb Classic Library, and I love these things. It's really great. It has the original language on one side, has the English on the other, or whatever language you're getting translated to, I guess. And I'd kind of like to talk to you about how I got into reading classics and how I got into reading in general. Truth is, I hated reading books. When I was a kid, I absolutely hated it. Basically, I was really into comic books, and I loved Wolverine, and I didn't really understand how the release dates worked. And so I would constantly go in there every week looking for new Wolverine comics, and eventually there weren't any because I didn't understand the release dates. So I ended up picking up a Batman comic, and the Batman comic was a graphic novel, Tales of the Demon, and in there it shows him lifting weights to get stronger, and I was like, oh, I can do that. But it also showed him reading books, and I think maybe even reading the encyclopedia. So me, genius, at like age 9 or whatever, I decided to try to read the encyclopedia. I don't think I made it past H. I'm pretty sure I made it to H. I don't think I made it past H. And that would have been it for my reading experience outside of what was required for school. And even then, I'd rather watch the movie, you know? But then I got really into Ghost. And so I thought I was just like watching a lot of like horror movies and stuff, right? But I then went to the library for some unknown reason. Like I had to look something up for school, and I saw that ghosts were also in the nonfiction section. I was like, that's where I want to go. So I started reading all the nonfiction paranormal stuff, and through reading that's how I ended up not believing in ghosts, and not believing in fate, and not believing in destiny, and not believing in magic. The reason why I don't believe in all that stuff is because I did a pretty good sum of research. Mostly all my reading was either weightlifting based, or weightlifting magazines, comic books, or on the paranormal, and that's like all my early teenage years of reading right there. So if it wasn't for school, I wouldn't do any fiction reading. That is until I was about, let's say 16, could have been 18, but I'm gonna say 16, and I started reading Dracula. And the reason why is because I read all this nonfiction stuff, and once I realized it was all BS, I was like, well, let's read the fiction. And I love Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie with Winona Ryder, I just thought it was amazing. So, and I thought she was hot. So, and the crazy redhead Lucy, yeah. So I was like, I want to read that. Dracula. It was my favorite book, honestly. It was my only book, but it was my favorite book. And then from there, I read Carmilla, and that's because when reading I think it was the forward for the anniversary edition of Dracula, it had it mentioned that the book was inspired by Carmilla, and that it actually ripped off stuff directly from Sheridan LeFou's book. So I read that one, and I was like, oh, this is my new favorite book. And so that got me down a black hole of just Gothic romance. And from Gothic literature, I got into mythology. And when I read all the Greek and Roman stuff, I fell in love with Odysseus. I read, you know, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I read Hesiod and Hesiod, whatever pronunciation, Working Days and Theogony. And then I read some of the Norse myths, and once I got through all of that, I was like, well, okay, well, let's expand that to religion. So then I started reading the Bible and the Quran and the Hindu scriptures. And once I got through all of that, I was like, well, let's read even older stuff. So then I got into the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Dead Sea Scrolls. I got into like just the more ancient the text, the more I loved it. But eventually, the problem with ancient text is not all of it's available in English, and I don't speak any other language than English. I have a little bit of Russian, but not much. So I was like, once I reached the end of that, I was like, well, where do I go? All that I had for resources at some point were just fragmentary texts, and that wasn't enough for me. And I wasn't going to learn a whole other language to read a translated dead language, because some of these texts still exist in Greek. I mean Greek in German and in French, but I just didn't have resources for that. Also, my only bookstore, this is pre-Amazon, my only bookstore was Hastings, so they didn't carry any of that. So I was like, well, where do I go to next? And I was like, well, I've been reading ancient mythology. Let's go see what their actual histories are. What are the actual histories are of these people? But I didn't read second or third hand knowledge. I didn't want to read a modern text version of their history. I wanted to read their history the way that it was written by them. And that's how I got into classics. I started off with what I, at the time, thought was the first history book, which was Herodotus, or Herodotus, as I used to say. And I fell in love with him. By this point, I'm in college. And then I read Thucydides, who I didn't like. Then I read Livy, who I loved. And then I read Caesar, The Conquerors of Gaul. And I discovered that I liked certain publishers. So at that point, I fell in love with Penguin Classics. And I would, every once in a while, read Oxford Classics. But I didn't have the money to afford the Loeb Classic Library, because those are $25 a book. Well, Penguin is something like $15, and Oxford is something like $10. Now you guys can just find whatever on Kindle for, you know, $3-4, but at the time I just couldn't afford it. So once I got through all the classics I could afford, or all the classics I had time to read, I was like, well, let me try regular fiction again. And that's when I got into watching BookTube. So now we're talking about like 5 years ago. And I started watching Katie Tastic and Pull the Banana Books. And they were talking about The Daughter of Smoke and Bone. So my first fiction book, after years of nonfiction, hardcore, dry history, was The Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. And it was awesome, an amazing, great book. And so now I try to have I try to go one hardcore fiction book and one hardcore history book, and I go like that, like one after another. That's kind of how my reading habits right now. For fiction, I was reading some Star Wars stuff, the Thrawn trilogy, and I've been reading The Witcher, which I'm liking. I got to get, I think it's The Lady of the Lake is the only one that I'm missing. And I'm now rebuying, now that I have a job and income, I am now rebuying some of the books that I already own from the Penguin Library. I'm buying the standard version for the translations, for the academics. Now, is this stuff amazing? Yeah, it is. Can I read the Latin to know if it's actually worth it? No. But it's a different translation of a book I already love, and that's always fun. Anyway, peace, like, subscribe, comment down below. What books do you own a bunch of? How did you get into reading? And what inspired you to read? What What dorky actual thing inspired you to read? Not the person, not the teacher. What dumb thing in your private life was like, for me, it was Batman. Batman got me to read books. What embarrassing thing got you to actually start reading? Talk to you later.